And I know many of you got up very early this morning to join us. This is the second to last program session for this afternoon. This session is focused on the arts, and we have with us Sara Cohan and Mary Johnson. Then we have Phyllis, Zimbler, Miller, and Amanda Greenbach Mitchell, all discussing their work in the arts and genocide prevention education. Thank you very much to you all. And as we said, Sara, you're going to kick us off.
Hi, my name is Sara Cohan, and Mary Johnson is with us as well. Her camera is not working at the moment, but she can join us by audio. Mary and I have been working in the field of genocide education for a total of maybe 70 years. That sounds good. Yeah. And we've been classroom teachers as well as teacher trainers. And
Sara, I'm so
yes,
sorry to interrupt you, but Mary, your mic is off. And Sara, could you hit the slideshow button on your screen?
yeah, I just don't remember which one it is. This is
the upper right there. It says slideshow.
Yeah.
Upper right next to the blue button that says share. You see, it says slideshow, right? You're right there. That's it. Click that.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you so much. And Mary, it sounds like we do have you for audio. Thank you.
And so we came together and started talking a few years ago. Mary's been thinking actually much longer about this than I have, and I'm a little newer to the show, that there should be some new ways in which we should think about genocide education as we move forward in the field. And one thing that has just been delightful for Mary and I is that over the course of the morning, we heard reiterated over and over again the same issues and concerns and solutions that we've also presented. So we do know there'll be a little bit of overlap, and but we also hope that some of the pieces that we are proposing may be new to the mix. So the first thing I wanted us to look at, Mary and I wanted us to look at, is just a small set of headlines from the past year. And I like to just disclose that I am both Armenian and Jewish. It doesn't necessarily matter, but I do think it's important to understand that, as objective as I can be, this is who I am. I also should say, to make that even more complicated, that my mother was raised in Beirut, and so saw the, her family had felt the consequences of the 1960s actions in Lebanon, between Lebanon and Israel. So given kind of a multifaceted history, family history this year was really, utterly disturbing. And some of the parts that have been disturbing are that, in the context of the focus on October 7th and the atrocities of Gaza, that there was an entire world of issues going on and concerns that were not being addressed in discussions that I heard about Holocaust and genocide education in the past year. For the most part, I know Kate's group has done a lot with these issues, but so there's a series of moments, and one particularly I'm going to admit is my bias, is that by the end of September last year, the ethnic Armenians, who were the indigenous people of an area called Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh to Armenians, was fell to genocide from the Azeris, and after almost a year blockade, 120,000 Armenians that populated that land, again, and indigenous peoples, were forced out, and that wasn't part of the conversation. But again, nor was the ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs, the skyrocketing violence against the people of Darfur and the victims of Tigray. So Mary's going to talk to this next slide.
I think rationale is something that it's come up several times today, and I think we really keep having to go back to that. Because if we think about the 80s, even the early 90s, much started with, even if you started to even mention anything about genocide, it was really Holocaust. And I think that's colored a great deal of sort of why we taught it. Now, I think as we're looking at other instances of genocide or atrocity crimes, we need to also sort of think, well, why do we do it? Where does it fit into the educational experience, both high school and university? And increasingly, we have to think about the fact that what's going on in the high school has very much of an impact on where they are when they come into the college classroom and the connections there and things that they think about. So I keep going back to Timothy Snyder for thinking about this question of rationale. Americans today are no wiser than Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, and communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. That here he's reminding us the connection of past and today and the importance of having those connections go on as part of the rationale. I also think that something that we need to increasingly think about, especially as we're looking at so many instances around the world, is good old geography. The part of it, because students often don't have as much sense of where places are. We have to sort of bring that and the importance of integrating that in as part of the rationale. Also, as a reason for why it's integrated in, I think one of the things that we can do is all of us, and it was reminded in one of the sessions talking about Florida, we go back to what the standards are. And we use those standards as a sort of point of departure. And then who was it that talked about behind the closed doors, of course, in the classroom? But that once you use those standards as a way to then get into these issues and massage them into things that we really want to be talking about. And therefore, we're covering the base of what we have to, sort of what is expected that has to be done, but also then moving in and bringing in these issues of genocide. The other thing that I think is part of this so-called rationale, or why we do this in the first place, is the importance of thinking about how people deal with difference in many different situations. And increasingly, I think it's not only using this, stance and the steps of genocide, if you will, but to look at what that's doing in different parts of the world now and in our classrooms as well, and the importance of that. So these are beginning points. And if we're going to think about rethinking how we're doing this, I think first we have to really sort of specify why we're doing it. And several of the sessions have already come up with other sort of reasons why, but to have that clear in our minds as we're thinking about what we're doing with it. Okay, Sara?
So kind of to just sum up some of the points that Mary just made, is that making genocide education relevant and understandable to students is paramount. And the process of learning about genocide, and of course not having the assumption that they may have been able to place and learn their geography, that we may have to cover geography, history, social, all parts of social science. But we need to provide a broader scope of learning. We need to find connections between students and issues that they care about that are in relationship to anything within the us-them nature, and demonstrate compassion, and help them demonstrate compassion and provide them with agency. So, in part of this is we're pivoting, where we hope to pivot in the quest to teach about genocide. And like we've heard earlier, one part that needs to be done is a repositioning of Holocaust ed from the central piece, but also to be inclusive, and so that we no longer use terms like Holocaust and genocide, and that we understand the connection that the Holocaust is a genocide, just as the Armenian case, just as the case in against the Sikhs, as the Cambodians, as the Ukrainians, etc. Unfortunately, etc. Unfortunately, etc. So and by creating a umbrella that holds genocide education in, under that, all sorts of different types of educations, we then place that umbrella over a larger one, under a larger one that would be human rights education. And so we are advocating to use the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a starting point in the process of genocide education, and that we start using a broader framework in most in current situations in which we discuss atrocity crimes, so that we don't have to worry about how a atrocity is being judged by scholars, legal and otherwise, at the moment that we're seeing chaos. And finally, using a true service learning framework, so that this is to provide students agency, to give them a sense of what it takes to create a campaign or to do some kind of contribution to better an us-them situation in their community, in their, in their schools, and whatever space that's appropriate for the situation. So one piece I'm going to turn over to Mary next is, as we finish our last 2 minutes, is Law Not War.
So, I mean, in part of thinking about this overall notion of putting it in a broader framework, thinking about it, I go back to Ben Ferencz, who throughout his career and many years thought that, when we're thinking about rebuilding our world, it has to be law, not war, and the awfulness of war that he continued to refer to throughout his career, and his dedication to international law, and certainly providing that as part of the framework for thinking about all of this and the importance of knowing this. The other thing is, I think many of us, as we're trying to think about a framework for looking at this, go back to the founding of the United Nations in the 40s, at the, after World War II, as World War II was coming to an end, and at the end of World War II, and how it was seen as this foundation, if you will, for a world of peace, and creating it and using that Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Convention for Genocide and for the punishment and prevention of genocide. Those are, I think, very important building blocks that help us broaden out the framework and not just thinking about one instance of genocide, looking more broadly at how the world is to be reframed, if you will, in the post-World War II era. I think it's an important period for looking at for that. Right. So, Sarah?
So as we close, we're just going to go back to the kind of the final scenario, which is that we would like to see a recentering to be more inclusive in our language as we move forward, and new pedagogies and practices for genocide education. We would like to see the use of new frameworks, like beginning with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the establishment of the UN, as well as looking at terms like atrocity crimes for current events, and so that we understand the immediacy of the issue without worrying about the title. And finally, service learning. Thank you.
So thank you both very much for, particularly for bringing in the topic of service learning specifically. It's certainly something for us to be giving a lot of thought to. Phyllis is going to speak with us about theater as a means of engaging students on this topic. And Phyllis, I see that your camera is on. And are you ready to go?
I am.
Wonderful. It's
And
all
I
you.
bring you greetings from Los Angeles. I'm Phyllis Zimbler Miller. As you heard, I'm going to talk about theater to engage students in understanding and preventing genocide, and with that theme of creating empathy for victims and rescuers. So of course I have to start with a quote from the master of empathy in theater, Shakespeare. In his play Hamlet, the prince says, "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And as you may recall, Hamlet wanted his uncle, the present king, to admit his guilt at murdering the former king, Hamlet's father. So Hamlet chose actors empathy promoting roles to elicit a guilty response in Hamlet's uncle. And another example that I would like to give, I will never forget the 1969 visceral experience I had when watching the surprise element in Robert Shaw's play, A Man in the Glass Booth. I'm not going to tell you the surprise element in case you haven't yet seen it and ever have the chance to. All I will say is that element emotionally slammed the entire audience into the center of the Eichmann trial in Israel. It was electrifying. So we know the definition of genocide is the goal of eliminating an entire people based on race, religion, natural origin, or some other factor. When it comes to this genocide of the Jews in the Holocaust, the Nazis, which based it on race instead of religion, but to some extent, we're not going to discuss that in any way in this case, they actually thought that they would murder 11 million Jews. And they put this down in writing in the Wannsee Protocol that was produced on January 20th, 1942, when really the mechanism of the final solution swung into major gear. So now I want to speak about my nonfiction Holocaust play, Thin Edge of the Wedge, which is to educate young people about the past, but also a call to action to the present. And I will just take a moment to say, this path, I'm 76 years old. Why do I tell you that? Because at the age of 22, I found myself, my American U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, with the U.S. Army only 25 years after the end of World War II. Typical American Jews, no Holocaust relatives that we knew about. And here we are in Munich, Germany. And we actually had, my husband worked directly under a civilian whose father had been a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial, and another civilian in my husband's unit had gotten out of Germany in time and had been a translator at the Nuremberg trial. So why do I tell you this? I come back to the United States and I get a role as the editor and reporter at the Jewish Exponent in Philadelphia. And I start publishing survivor and savior testimonies at a time when it was not fashionable to do it. And I'll skip all the intervening years to say, except that a few years ago, I said to my dear friend, I really feel badly those amazing testimonies are not online because it was before the internet. And she said, write a play. So I wrote a play and rewrote a play, and Susie Jacques was my dramaturg. And the response has been really amazing. Now, why is a play, just in case you don't understand Thin Edge of the Wedge, the definition means a minor harmful change that starts a chain of more and more changes resulting in disastrous consequences. And this is what I wanted to warn about, both from the past and the present. And I'm just to give you an example of why theater can be cautionary beside historic, just going to read you the very, very short beginning of how the play begins. And it's the Phyllis character, the narrator character. I have often looked at my engagement ring and whether I would have had the courage to act in my instincts as Judith's mother did. Would I have given my diamond ring to a Lithuanian peasant, praying that he could be trusted to risk his life to save my child? Why does Judith's story continue to haunt me so many years after I first heard it? I am Phyllis, and I was born in the United States in 1948 to American Jews 3 years after the end of World War II and 2 months before the birth of the State of Israel. Can my concern for the survival of the State of Israel, as well as my horror over Nazi Germany's murder of 6 million Jews and so many others, explain why I'm so worried that history may be repeating itself? Given recent news events, is Western civilization once again experiencing the thin edge of the wedge? And the final sentence of the play is, the narrator says, all it takes is allowing the thin edge of the wedge to grow so wide until there is no turning back. So why does theater work to create empathy? First of all, a play was not written to be performed as an entire play necessarily. The students can take on the roles and read it in classrooms. And because no two students, there's no dialogue, because since it's true accounts, these people didn't meet each other in real life. There are PDFs of the excerpts. So if you're studying the Warsaw Ghetto, you could have a student do the part of a survivor, of a kid. And that brings me to another point, and also of a rescuer. Some of the reason that I've been told that kids really respond to this play is that when they see a survivor who's as old as, older than I am, there's this generation gap. But when they hear students their age reading a part of a student their age, it makes it much more real. And as opposed to documentaries and films, imagination in theater can depict the concept of piled up bodies, for example, without seeing the reality. As one of the teachers in Germany who I was in contact with told me, some of her high school students, when watching Schindler's List, had to walk out of the room. They couldn't take it. And so a play enables students to feel these emotions without having to see them. And yes, books can also allow the imagination to fill in the blanks. And yet, and I've read a lot of Holocaust books, especially since the pandemic, frequently they only focus on one thing. It's Holland, hiding in Holland, or surviving Auschwitz. The thin edge of the wedge tries to get as wide a view of what's going on, including the Roma, as possible over a timeline to give students a sense of how it happened, and then happened, and that didn't happen. And so because of the pandemic, Amos Kramer, a high school history teacher in Heidelberg, connected with me on I'll admit it, science fiction fan webinar. It was out of Germany, but in English. And he's been teaching the Holocaust for many years, and he paid to have the play translated professionally into German as an extra tool for him to use. And I'm just going to read you just like a couple lines of what he said about using the play. He was very pleased that he got the reactions that he hoped from the students, who said that they felt reading the parts in class in German brought them much closer to understanding the subject than either his lecture or the documentaries he's shown. And he said, quote, I have taught the subject of the Holocaust many times, and as a teacher, you always ask yourself, how can you convey this sensitive subject, especially in a limited time? The play Thin Edge of the Wedge, which gives an overview of the various fates of persecution, may offer a different and more emotional approach than if one were to work on written material or watch films. At the same time, the play does not work with dramatization and fictionalization, so it remains very much on the factual historical level, and therefore perhaps has a special credibility. The narrative figure of the author gives the individual fates a bracket and creates a relevance to today. And I will say that early on, a Hollywood film director said to me, well, why don't you dramatize it in the play? And I said, no. I said, there's enough Holocaust denial, and the testimonies are dramatic enough. And actually, that brings me to something else. If you're working in Holocaust education, that took me years to understand. If you talk about Auschwitz, you must talk about it at an exact point in time and the exact group of people. In fact, I have a lot of information on my website connected to the play, and I talk about the difference because there were people in Auschwitz, believe it or not, who had their own clothes. They were in a special camp. And although tattoos were given in Auschwitz, there were times when they weren't given, again, depending on the special class and near the end. So in order to push back against Holocaust deniers, it's very, very important to talk about which specific time you're talking about, which specific group you're talking about. And that's what theater can help students do. And then it can encourage them to do more of their own work. So one of the suggestions in connecting with the play is that students can do accompanying articles. So for example, they might do an art project. The play is done in a bare stage, but they might do, props. They might write music. They might look up more biographies of some of the characters. I mean, the real life characters. These are no fictional characters. They might do short videos. So it's encouraging students to delve deeper. And my website has information by different countries. I went to the Eradicate Hate Summit last September, a fabulous summit. And yet the person sitting next to me said, I was talking about not Anne Frank, but some research I'm doing about Holland. And he didn't realize the Holocaust was in Holland, which is interesting, forgetting Anne Frank. But the point is, when you see all these different countries in my play and then the accompanying information, you begin to get, I mean, I remember in the play, I recount the first time I was 21. On my honeymoon in Israel, when I found out that there were Greek Jews, I had no idea there were Greek Jews. And yet I saw a memorial plaque for them. So, and then after the play, there could be a talk back. And again, you get your students involved, how they felt about it. The questions they have. It's a really great way to encourage them, and then encourage them to write their own mini plays about different characters, about different countries. Might ask a student, well, where did your ancestors come from? And if it's a country that in fact experienced the Holocaust or didn't experience the Holocaust because of various reasons, then they can do a little play about it. And again, it gets the students hands-on. So as I was going to read, but I see I've run out of time. One of the things that on my website, I talk about questions from the present, not just the past in connection to the play. And I'll just give you one or two. Do you read here the news of anti-Semitic and racist acts against people and property today, and only think that's too bad without doing anything against these acts? And do you think if the attacks are not against your ethnicity or gender identification, that you are safe? So again, the play is teaching history, but encouraging young people to look at the reality around them today and speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can always email me at pzmiller@gmail.com. And I'm happy to send you a copy of the play in English or German. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your contribution to the day. Amanda, if you are ready to go, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So today, I'm really excited to talk to you all about folk songs as musical resistance and offer you a few tools here and there to implement this and this content into your classrooms. Hi, my name is Amanda Greenbacker Mitchell. I'm a PhD candidate in music education at the University of Missouri. I'm actually currently writing my dissertation on the music education practices of children in Terezin. So this is very much in my zeitgeist right now. So I'm very excited to share with you. So really quickly, let's talk about why we should or could use music when we're teaching about the Holocaust. So music is a direct reflection of a person's interpretation of events, specifically thinking about folk song, or of a group's collective understanding of their surroundings. So more than anything, it's a primary historical source. Folk songs help to communicate the ideals, customs, and experiences of a person or a culture. So it's also a primary cultural source if you're learning about a group of people. Folk song and music can help to humanize an other, whomever that other may be, because on some level, every single culture in the world interacts with music. Absolutely not in the same way, but most cultures do interact with music. So it's something that we can connect to on a very basic level. Music in your classroom can help benefit your students' analytical skills, both textually and historically. So we're using it both as a literacy tool and a historical tool. It can also promote student engagement because, again, everybody interacts with music in some way. And then finally, it can help your students develop critical thinking skills, which we all need to foster in our classrooms. We've been talking about that a lot. So today we're going to be focusing on two main branches of folk song as musical resistance. There is a third, but the two we're talking about today are the preservation of existing folk songs and the resurgence of existing folk songs, as well as the creation of new folk songs. There's a third option in the middle there where in the camp system, there's evidence of existing folk songs having updated lyrics. But for the sake of time, we're going to be focusing on the resurgence of existing ones and the creation of new ones. So if we're talking about the preservation and creation of folk songs, Shoshana Kalish has this incredible quote where she says, "Yes, we sang in the ghettos and concentration camps. Songs were sung even in the death camps. They were the only means of expressing our sadness and grief, defiance and hope. When our spirits sank, the songs took over, and they helped us to keep our faith that the life held some meaning." Just incredible to me. What's very interesting is that folk songs flourished in the camp system because participatory singing is available to all. For my American folks on here, if I sang to you, Old MacDonald had a farm, you would respond, E-I-E-I-O. That's participatory singing. You do not have to be trained. It is something that is just intrinsic. Also, these folk songs were associated with different subgroups of prisoners. So picking up on what Phyllis was talking about, where you need to be specific about who you're talking about within a camp system, folk songs can help do that. Not all of these folk songs were in the same language because not all the prisoners were speaking the same language. Not all the prisoners were treated the same way. So different depictions of the same camp can happen in different folk songs because they're coming from different groups of people. They're not reflecting the same experiences. So let's talk about folk songs as historical contexts. Folk songs of this time are a significant body of historical text, similar to a diary. But folk songs are a little bit different, however, because they've been preserved through a larger social framework. They're talking about, there's an interplay between personal understanding in a folk song as well as a cultural understanding. So they can convey the retrospective understanding of a person, as well as the uncertain shifting perspectives of what communities were facing at that time. But like a diary, they do capture a very specific moment in time. They tell us what people knew or they didn't know and when. They also represent personal interpretation and they approximate factual documentation because, you know, when you're in these situations, you can't see the larger context. You can only see what you're experiencing. So communities use these folk songs to make sense of what was happening around them. And the songs may not be factually correct in their interpretation or representative of the larger context, but they did directly reflect the personal and communal experiences of a group of people. Folk songs were sung in the concentration camp, again, can be broken down into three categories. There's the resurgence of existing, updated lyrics for older folk songs, and the creation of new folk songs. The first one we're going to be talking about is the resurgence of an existing tune, which is called Zweetaibelach, which means two doves. It was an old Yiddish folk song. It was made popular in the Vilna ghetto by the beautiful Lyuba Levitska, a Polish-Lithuanian woman. She became incredibly well known in the ghetto, and she was referred to as the nightingale of the Vilna ghetto, a singing bird with a gorgeous voice. She'd been employed as a concert and opera singer, so she was a hired soloist before her arrest and became quite popular with the German public before her arrest, as well as with Jewish populations. And outside of the ghetto, she had sung in classical concert halls, but inside of Vilna, she sang Hebrew and Yiddish folk songs. So the song itself talks about the story of two young, like turtle doves that are in love and that are torn away from each other by some unknown evil force. Now remember, this song predates the Holocaust. It was known as a song that said to be brave, and it was viewed through that light rather than as a love song. And to those in the ghetto, these lyrics could represent what they were feeling, that sorrow, the pain. And it was used as a form of expressing feelings that people already held and using music that already existed. So it's a sense of comfort, it's a sense of home, it's something they knew, and they're able to express their feelings through it, whether they're listening to it or they're singing. Because if you listen to music, you are just as much participating in the act of music making as if you were singing it or performing it. After being caught with contraband, Lyuba was given 25 lashes and thrown into prison. She was kept in solitary confinement for a month and then was ultimately driven to the Ponar killing center. And there is legend, it is unsubstantiated, but there is legend, according to those who came from Vilna, that Lyuba was singing Svetai as she was brought to Ponar. So we're going to really quickly do a small lyric analysis of Svetai. On the left-hand side, we have Yiddish, and then on the right-hand side, we have the English translation. I am going to play just a tiny little bit of this for us because we don't have very much time. But what I would love for you to do is pay attention to the lyrics themselves.
Zwei Teibelach sind über das Wasser geflogen. In die Pistelach sie sehr gekischt. In die Pistelach sie sehr gekischt. Ei verscholten soll werden, jener Mensch auf der Welt. Was hat sich in seine Liebe, oh ja, reingemischt.
We're going to stop there, sadly. I know it hurts me to turn it off, but taking a look at the second verse too, some of the questions that you can ask your students if you were to bring this to them as a literacy and as a historical source, thinking about it from the literary perspective, who is the narrator and how would you characterize them? Is the song told in first, second, third person? What is the actual story that these lyrics themselves are saying? When does this song take place? What is the mood? What is the genre? What does the music match the mood? Does the music that you're hearing match the tone of the lyrics? What symbols or metaphors are present in this song? And through what lenses can we analyze this piece? Does our analysis change when we change our lens? And then what reaction do you have to this song? Oh, can I get over to I'm sorry, I am having a moment here. And my cat is coming for me. Hold on one second, y'all. I apologize. There we go. Oh my goodness. There we go. Holy moly. So literacy takeaways for Svetai Balak. You can view a text through varied and layered lenses, whether that's the original intent or layered on top of that is your personal interpretation of that song, the group interpretation of that song, and then the story of Lyuba layered on top of all of that. It's also a great opportunity to talk about metaphor, mood, tone, characterization. And then for historical takeaways, thinking about the nuance and layering of personal experience versus collective experience, and the humanization and the personalization of history, focusing on one person's story rather than large numbers, which we know we are moving to. Next up, we have the creation of new folk songs, and this one is called More Soldaten. It's the Peat Bog Soldiers, and this folk song was written in the camp systems. It was specifically from Sachsenhausen. It was the unofficial song of Bürgermord, and then popularized by the camp's political prisoners. It became famous from this camp. People knew this, depicting the prisoners' daily life of drying out a peat bog swamp. And after the camp's opening, political prisoners quickly organized and began to resist, leading to the implementation of kapos. This is where the hierarchy system came in. After the capo installation, the only form of resistance that was possible was spiritual resistance. And poetry also became a popular means of personal expression as well as song. More Soldaten was written by a miner after a particularly brutal beating. It was performed for fellow prisoners and became just an instant hit. And it's rumored that even the Nazi guards sang along to the final refrain. And it is catchy. It is an earworm. It will be stuck in your head later. I will warn you. Many Bergamo prisoners were released and transferred or just brought to other camps, and the song was spread that way. And it was performed publicly sometimes as a means of spreading knowledge of Nazi practices. An important note about the nuance of this one in particular is that the idea of who created the song should not be left out. Nazis allowed this song to be sung publicly and joined in because of its association with political prisoners and not Jews, who were treated significantly worse even early on in the camp system. So one more way to think about, okay, this song comes from this group of people, so it's saying this particular thing about this camp. So we're going to do a small little lyric analysis with our little bit of time that we have. So on the left column is the first verse and the refrain, and then the translation. And then the third column is actually the last verse and refrain after 5 or 6 of them, and then the chorus once more. Let me pull this over for you.
Wohin auf das Auge blicket, Moor und Heide nur ringsum. Vogelsang uns nicht erquicket, Eichen stehen kahl und krumm. Wir sind die Moorsoldaten und ziehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor. Wir sind die Moorsoldaten und ziehen mit dem Spaten ins Moor.
Again, I know, very catchy. I wish I didn't have to turn it off. But I'm going to ask some of the same questions that we talked about for Svea Tybelak, thinking about who is the narrator, what person is this told in, what's the mood of this song. But I do want to bring your attention to the first refrain and to the last refrain. The words have changed slightly. What is the point of that change? What effect does that small change have in our perception and in their storytelling? So moving on, the literary takeaways that we can have from Moorsoldaten. It has extensive imagery, examples of irony, poetic literary devices like meter and rhyme, dissonance and upbeat tune with somber lyrics, and political defiance on the historical side. I know I'm running out of time, but I'm having a good time. There are some other folk songs you should know. And then finally, thinking about suggestions for what you can do. I suggest you start with just one piece of music and contextualize it for your students, and then let them experience it. And then reach out to your fellow teachers, your music teachers. They really want to work with you. And this is an incredible opportunity to make this an interdisciplinary project for your classroom. And you'll be surprised how willing your band, choir, and orchestra people will be to talk to you. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely engaging. And I know I absolutely will have a difficult time getting those tunes out of my ear later on today. We have a couple of questions for you. The first question is from Tracy, who says she just wants to say that she loves this. As an English teacher, it helps her to hear the literary terms being used with this activity, and that kids usually love music and are more engaged with activities. So lots of appreciation from Tracy. And Christopher Cox is saying that he thinks that the cadence, and Christopher, if you can drop in the Q&A which song you mean, that one of the cadences sounded very familiar. Is there, is there possibly a tie to something more contemporary?
What I can tell you is that a lot of these marching songs, because Die Moorsoldaten very specifically comes from a marching song tradition, melodies were often recycled. So whether it was a Nazi marching tune, a German or a Nazi marching tune that was already in the zeitgeist of prisoners, they would just take that stuff and change the lyrics to it. So you may have heard it before.
Absolutely. There you go. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And I'm looking for any other questions. We are, let's see. Oh, no, we do have time. I was thinking that because we had run a little over the last time, we might hold, but we've got a little bit more time still left for questions. And if you have something you want to put in the chat box, that is just great. Or questions in the Q&A. I know, so are you envisioning, where are you envisioning that the music, you're giving us all the literary terms. Do you have any grade levels in mind when you're thinking about this?
Sure. I have mostly worked with high school students, but to me, there's no reason that you couldn't do this with middle school students. It's an easy onboarding to bigger, harder topics. It's an easy way for these students to get to buy in. It's also a really great way for you to connect what they are listening to the content that you're working on. In that activity document that I sent you, there's a graphic organizer at the bottom that allows you to look at different genres of music through different eras and talk about music as resistance through time. And I have had a lot of success with that, with middle schoolers, particularly because they're always excited to tell you what they're listening to or what songs they know or what their parents are listening to.
In a way, you answered the question that came up, and that is, can you address other forms of music that can be used? So maybe something other than folk songs. How would you apply this there?
Absolutely. I come from a punk rock tradition. I married a rock musician. I'm a punk kid myself. So pulling in your punk rock kids and talking about, the Clash and things like that, and how political messages are brought up in punk music, hip hop and rap. Absolutely. We're seeing titans of the industry using their power in those genres to speak out, like Kendrick Lamar and Beyonce. And they're so hot right now, I guess is the right word. But yes, absolutely. I think if you dig deeply enough into any genre, you can find something that's subversive and has meaning in it.
I imagine that you are correct. And I'm looking to see if Phyllis is no longer in the presenters, or are you, Phyllis? Okay,
Yes,
so
she is.
I am.
okay, great.
I
Okay,
am.
great. So Phyllis, you see the question that Kim was posing. So
Yes.
what other pieces of dramatic literature can you think of that could be used, and even if it's not specifically Holocaust related, for teaching about Holocaust and or contemporary and historic genocide?
There is a database, which I don't have the link up for. It's run out of someone in Florida has a list of Holocaust plays, etc. But I really would encourage teachers to have their students do little plays, because again, once you get the students involved, and they can then use the music of Amanda, it makes such a difference. So, but I would very caution people to make sure that if you want a fictional dramatization, whether you're using a play or, an existing play or having a student, make sure that you make a point that it's fictionalized, because otherwise it can be very confusing for students.
Very good. Thank you very much. I have a question for Sara and Mary. And Henry Theriault is wondering if you can say more about the use of service learning for genocide education. Perhaps, do you have any examples?
I think one of the important things with service learning is that you weave it into your syllabus, and so that from the beginning you're looking at a project alongside of history and or philosophy or whatever you're teaching, and in that process, students are responsible not just for designing and implementing something or helping a project that's already been formed, but in an innovative way, but also taking feedback from community members of how to proceed and not proceeding without their permission, so that it's a balanced way of students entering into a situation without presumptions or stereotypes that might come into play.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I
Um,
think there's also opportunity for some metacognition and some reflection on, did I accomplish the thing I meant to do? Is it really fulfilling that purpose? And so forth. as part of that whole service learning process.
Absolutely. And I'm so sorry on that slide. I had kind of the main component. One is absolutely like reflection and that also kind of goes back to the community and in that reflection also like ingesting community response and yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.